All right, long time since an update. Sometimes you just don't want to worry about recording thoughts and the amount of time it takes to edit all those out when they prove to be wrong later. And ramblings. All right, so it looks like I've done little at all except cut a hole there, but I was struggling because this area, this curved away, and it was greater than the door width from here. So when you carried the door up, well, suddenly the door would have to be wider just there than everywhere else, which doesn't make any sense. So I've actually had my interior trim in and out. I've had the seatbelt mount reel in and out multiple times. The back axle is back out again, all that sort of stuff. It's all time consuming. So what I end up doing is pulling this outwards by cutting up through here all the way back to there. You can look on the other side, you can see there where I've cut around and then pulled it outwards, and then I've cut the overlap off, welded it back up again. Now, why that solves that problem and gets everything within the door width plus how much the seal will crush, because I had to put the seal in, see how much it should be crushed, how much space it took up, how much I should compress it. So, and then compare it to both sides, the other pillars that I've got. The A pillar is still another ball game, and that has to be moved inwards because I've got the opposite problem there, that I haven't got enough between where the seal sits and there. So I could either do a step in the door if that works, but being the hinge side, it probably won't, and I'll have to move this part of the seal. So where this lip comes up, this will taper in all the way to there and then come up, which is what was my original thought. And I've got to leave enough room for this seat belt and everything as well. And then I had to come to design the C pillar. I've got to start somewhere. You've got to have something to work off, and that's been the really hard thing, is not building things but knowing what to build. So I decided to start at the C pillar. So I am creating the C pillar a mirror image. Don't want to get that wrong. So I forgot to show it with the other one, but I'm doing it differently than the other one, where the other one I just did some folded up angle and then stretched and shrunk to get that shape, and then added another piece into that. So this time I hope to do with one weld less, and in the end I end up having to adjust and then welding on that corner. So I'm thinking I might as well do the whole thing like that. So before I folded this, I cut up here the exact position where this straight line stops, and I'm going to make a template along here, then sit it on here, and then shape this this piece here to follow that line, and then cut the excess off and do a nice corner to corner weld. And before I start, and then I'll tip this outside line which has got a curve on it. So this I could just do in the folder because it's straight up and for that first 2/3, but this one has got that slight bend to it because it's the upper door pillar. So if you pull it out, you can see how much it's moved out. Anyway, this time I thought I'd show a process even though it's different. So see how it goes. Alright, so after cutting out the extra piece there, so of course it just went straight, so and you can see it on the ground there. Just cut that out, and then what I did to shape that edge there, I just passed it back through the step dies, pulling up on this where I needed to curve that way and pulling down on it as it passed through the rollers, and that produced that curve. And then I just did a little bit of hammering on the bench for the actual flat part. And that's why also it's important, you can see I've got a roller support on the other side, so when I was doing the long edge, obviously it wasn't that far away, it passed onto that so it stayed level. Because if you haven't got a big table like the pros use when they're doing the more artistry stuff, and you let that sag, you will put a curve in that panel. You're basically doing the same as an English wheel. If you don't support it, you will get compound stretching and not linear stretching just by letting it hang either side of the bottom die. And this is exactly the same principle. If you pull up on it or pull down on it, it must remain level as it passes through those bead rollers, otherwise you will get whatever shape it's hanging. If it's hanging down, it will curve down. So now this is the penetration side, as you can see. Just did it with the teeth quickly, and to clean that up I'll use a cut-off wheel, one of the thin ones, and then I can just get in with that and just dress it up a little bit. The rest, as far as that, matching that curve, that'll happen during just even high build epoxy will fill that cornering. So that's not a problem, not a concern. And you can see I've done the same here on this one here as well. It looks quite neat once you've put the just knocked off the excess penetration off. Anyway, progress. All right, the next step, I've just ground that first with the 1-inch cut-off wheel, and then just quickly with the flap disc over there. That's what the inside looks like. And so the next is to tilt this way, which will come roughly halfway, and then when I do the opposite, hang on, I've got to look to see what my viewfinder says. I'm about to turn over this curved surface, which is this one here. So I can just use the template to get my curvature that I would refer back to, and the distance was simply from there to there and that corner to that corner, so I knew exactly. I did it, measured on the inside because this will be the inside, and so as I pass it through the wheel I'll tip it up like this way. I might actually try, so I don't get those track marks, the soft lower die for the tipping die. I've got one of those as well. See if that works any better. I've done it just on not using the groove because I've got the same problem, but doing it that way, and it seemed to work quite well, so I might do that again. For the hinges that I'm going to use, so these are the hinges. These closely represent what was on there. So this was one door. They had all the different lengths. Anyway, you get the picture. They were all different spacing apart depending if it was front or rear. Anyway, so the closest I could find, because I wanted just duplicates of this one, was this here. The main difference is the width, as you can see. Beautiful match, brand spanking new, still made in by a US company. As far as I know, it's actually made in the US. They're 60mm instead of 50mm, 2-inch versus 2 1/4, would they be, or 2 3/8, something like that. And they're actually for a Type 1 Volkswagen upper hinge. Big mouthful. So that's got the same sort of stop on it, although I'd probably prefer a check strap anyway, but even that's the same. See that? If you want the part number, it says AirTech, and there'll be a left and right. So this is 1118314T20. I think that's a G on the end, and if I remember correctly, the opposite side had a different letter on the end anyway. So 11, 18, 31, 42G, AirTech. US, I can't remember the name of the company I bought it from. I had a little bit of problem with them. They sent 3 rights and 5 lefts. And I had to argue and argue to send a new one out, and they refused. And eventually just gave them money back for the one hinge that they got wrong. And it doesn't cover the freight. The freight was worth more bringing one hinge out than what the hinge was worth. So they just wouldn't comply. There's just no thought at all of they're looking after the people. Here it is. Oh, here we go. So, well, this one's listed here, 111-401G, upper left, West Coast metric, and I bought directly from them, and they were not nice to deal with. There's another left. Let's see if I can find the right for you. Sorry about this. This might be the right. 402G. There you go. So that's the upper right. So bug, 1956 to 79. Manufactured and imported quality parts for Volkswagen, California. So West Coast metric. Anyway, not a good company to deal with. They refused to make things right. So I've had to, this one here, that was the extra left I got instead of a right. I had to weld all the holes up and re-drill them. Anyway, probably edit most of this out. This is going to sit like that. So I've made these come in as far as I can, and that took a little bit of working out as well. So basically that line there will be where the door skin will sit. So, and that's another thing, this part is not straight. This has got the curve that matches the curve of the upper door frame, this part here, and it has to be 5mm further set in, because that's how the pillar will sit, how they sit on these. Too hard to show on that one. So it's just a lot of thinking to come up with all this. Just to show what all things have to be worked out ahead of time. To create these pockets last time, for the hinge to sit in flush, the hinge is 5mm thick, or 3/16, so it has to recess. Now on this one, I just cut the pocket out and then down the thickness of the 10mm plate that I'm using for the thread insert, and then back up again. Now then I had to weld in a 5mm border all the way around, and then weld that border to the outside here. So you had 2 welds really close to each other that I together. Now this time I thought I might try something a bit different, and that is to first had to measure from here to there, and then take off your material thickness. Because you've got the material going down, so if I marked it to here, the material thickness would move inwards. So you've got to take that into account. And then I've added my 5mm to then see if I can then turn that downwards. And on this end here, I've got to come down 15mm, so 5mm for the recess plus another 10mm for the thickness of the plate, because the plate's going to come through and be flush with this and then ground smooth like I've done here. So you can sort of get the idea. See, the plate actually comes all the way through and out the front, and then it was welded and then ground flush. So you've got to also relieve the corners, so that's one problem with this. I'm going to have a little triangle corner when this folds down each way that has to be filled up. So I don't know how much advantage or disadvantage it's all going to be. I'll probably put some thick copper in the corner and then fill up with weld on the outside or something like that. At worst, I'll just cut it all out and do it exactly the same as I did here. So that's all you got to worry about, really, that you've got a way out of it. But I've got to come in here, cut across to here, across to there, up to here, along the top of here, then down here, across here, and then up there and stop there without going through into this area, because that area is going to be folded down. And then I've got to also cut into this corner here, cut into that corner there, so these can then be folded down. And then it's got to be positioned on something that I can then hammer that over, hammer that this way, hammer that way. So 6 of one, half a dozen the other. I'll see if this works out neater. It saves me a weld all the way around the perimeter, if it works out all right. Time will tell, I guess, but it's these sort of things that you've constantly got to think, how's this going to work? How am I going to go ahead with this? So it's something simple can actually be rather complex. Alright, as you can see, I've just cut in there with a 5-inch cut-off grinder, and as I was cutting, I suddenly thought, oh, hang on, I've got to leave material thickness there as well, because by the time that folds down, it has to be flush with the front face. So I left a little bit on each corner there. So by the time, if this represents the nutsert that comes through, obviously it's a solid piece of metal, that slots through there, and this is already folded down. So what I'll do probably is hammer it over there like that, and then hammer down over that dolly there, move it to this side, and then hammer this front face down once the two sides are done. Now what I will also do is I'll mark that same bend line around here and just give it a tap with a blunt cold chisel, just to create a point of fracture for where the fold will come up. So I'm not cutting it, but I'm bruising the metal all the way around my fold line on the inside. So one, it makes it, it just makes it fold more accurately, rather than you lining it up and then hitting it over, and this will give you a bit sharper fold if you just bruise it with a blunt cold chisel around the side there. So that's what I'll do next. So I'll mark that out, that 5mm border all the way around, hammer a groove basically with the cold chisel, and then fold it over this old Heyman Reese tow bar tongue. So next step. Alright, still not as easy as you would expect, at least not for me, and one of the reasons I went that way in the first place. I had thought of doing it this way. It's just awkward. I ended up finding that the Heyman Reese tongue was not sharp enough, and switched to my wood splitter. So placed it over there like that, and then hammered in each way The corners were tricky because you couldn't get the hammer in all the way to the corner without starting the next one. Had to use sort of this hammering into the corner there like that, so I could get into there. Even resorted to a bit of bolster work and even these pliers just to pull it over and straighten everything up. But anyway, it's another way of doing it. It's all about back to back. Then you can do a direct comparison. There's no surprises really on the effort it took. Saves a lot of welding, but you spend a lot of time perfecting as well. So 6 of one, half dozen of the other. So now I'm going to make the nut inserts out of a 10mm plate and drill and tap them the same as this. I'll double check to make sure the left and right hinges have the same. They have the same pattern, but I can't remember if it's inversed or not. So I will definitely check that before I do it. All right, there you go. Next step. What I'm working on currently is the upper part of the C-pillar and determining exactly the angle of the bottom inertia reel to make sure that it runs up and down. So I'm pulling it full out extension and letting it run in, making sure that the belt stays exactly in the middle and is not wavering from one side to the other. I have extreme limited room, and that's what took me so long to establish this C-pillar, because you can see here that shiny bit here is actually the back half of this coming through, and well, actually this part here coming through the actual part, and that'll all be fully welded in. So I already had the pocket here, but I'm literally hard on one side of this inertia reel and hard up the other, and I just had to take the 4 spot welds out temporarily, as you can see here, and just move this nut plate across a little bit. And you can see I didn't have to move it much, but it's twisted out a little bit just to get all that perfect line and then get it up so it sits on this reel. That's how I had to determine the width of this C-pillar and everything for placement of the upper belt in the right height and right position, left to right, etc. So this is just temporarily all held in place with clamps at the moment. I haven't tried to true these up at all. But I can put a few tacks in there while everything's perfectly in position, and then fully weld the 4 spot welds back in again, and then fully weld across the top once I take this off. But I needed to be able to make sure it fitted within this. I cut this side an identical template to the one on the opposite side, so I knew that I'd have it identical left to right, and then still made sure that this was vertical this way as well as this way, because that affects the hinges. So all that had to be taken into account, and make sure that this wasn't too far away from the door closing and running out of space when the body comes around here and then tucks into that corner. So that's why this took a long time on the opposite side, and I was so caught up in it I didn't even take many photos, because my head was just literally 2 millimeters. I literally had to curve the original inside panel just up a fraction so I could bring it forward, I think 3 millimeters or something ridiculous, just so I could fit the inertia in on the right angle. So anyway, enough babbling. It's just that people often don't realise when you're making something from scratch how many things you have to take into account. I've TIG welded the 2 halves together. So that's using the TIG pen with the 1.2 millimeter, I think it's 043 gauge wire, and because you don't want too much build up. It's just more you've got to grind away. So small filler rod melts quicker, match it to the parent metal or even less, and if you've got good gaps, it's mainly a fuse wire, a fuse joint anyway. So what I'll do now is that I'll just knock it down so it's a bit flatter over the new stake dolly I've made just for this. So it's out of some plate that was part of a tow bar from the Willys truck, and that I've welded onto a piece of the channel that was also in the part of the bumper bar, and so I'll just knock it down on top of that to stretch the weld a little bit right along, most likely with a smaller hammer, and then later on when it's ground I'll switch to the flipper and or slapper, and then I'll start doing some truing up to make sure. I might run a DA over it so I can see the highs and lows, and what I'll do is I'll jam my chest or stomach against this end while pulling down with my hand on the other. If I have to raise something, I touch it around the low part and that will pop it up, but you've got to be pulling down on it to do it, or what I'll do is I'll flip it over and use either that stake or something else, even a hammer, and then try and balance it, and then so because this bottom surface is curved, it's got to be flat on the bench, and then knock it down with using a stake and hitting the top of that, and raise low spots that way. It just depends on how severe it is and how well it moves. So that's the next part, is to first do a bit of stretching and to get us somewhere near flat, and then I can grind both sides. I usually leave a little bit proud on the top, so if there's any low spots on the bottom along the weld, you can push the high from the top down, and then straighten it out that way.